Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughn Manor. And welcome once again to my epic comic book Wednesday. Once a week, I do my epic comic book Wednesday where I'll talk about a Marvel epic collection. Steve Donoghue on his channel also will talk about that same epic collection. So it's our world's finest team up where we talk about this particular epic collection and we'll each give our own take on it. So today's epic collection is the Mighty Thor in his first epic collection, the God of Thunder. Now, I am a pretty big Thor fan. I think that this is a fantastic character. I have a lot of Thor on my shelves here at Stately Vaughn Manor. And this is the first epic collection. This has Thor's Adventures from Journey into Mystery number 83 to 109, which took place 1962 to 1964. So Thor was a pretty early Marvel comic book character. Thor was a great idea. Stan Lee had the idea to bring in a Norse god, make one of his superheroes a god, because he liked the Norse mythology. Fantastic idea. And Jack Kirby really took this idea and ran with it. Jack Kirby was the main artist at the beginning and towards the end of this book. Kind of spotted throughout. Jack Kirby does artwork on it. And I think Jack Kirby's run on Thor was some of the best work Jack Kirby ever did. Thor is a character that was kind of made for Jack Kirby. Just with the fantasy element, the mythological element. That's right up Jack Kirby's street. So good stuff. So the Mighty Thor. Now Thor is one of those characters that had kind of a rocky start. Stan Lee had a great idea with Thor, but he had a rough time executing it at first. Part of that, I suspect, is that he was just so busy at this point, just taking care of all these different comic books. Jack Kirby pretty busy as well, and he just kept getting busier. So sometimes that kind of left Thor out in the cold, I'm afraid. And we'll get to that. This epic collection kind of has the good, the bad, and the ugly of Thor. Good stuff's in here, bad stuff's in here, terrible stuff is in here. So it's an interesting epic collection for that. By the time you get to the second epic collection, you're pretty much up and running, and Thor's getting really, really great. Now, as far as Thor's epic beginning, his origin story, the artwork is fantastic. The cover is okay. There's the Mighty Thor swinging his hammer around, and that's a cool effect. But look at that splash page. That is fantastic. Jack Kirby was up and running with this character. And this is the very first page of Thor. And he's already got this character down. That is a fantastic image of Thor. Jack Kirby was doing his best in this story. Unfortunately, the story part of the story wasn't quite as good. Once again, we go to Stan Lee's go-to bad guys, a race of aliens that are wanting to conquer the Earth. Whenever Stan Lee didn't quite know what to do for a villain, he yanked aliens out of the sky and had them be the villains. Always kind of the same thing with a different set of aliens. I think all the Marvel superheroes were fighting aliens at one point or another. So in this story, Dr. Don Blake, who is a disabled man, wanders into a cave, gets himself trapped into the cave because he's Dr. Donald Blake, and he finds this stick lying around. But when he tries to use the stick to try to use it to help him get out of the cave, he is transformed into the Mighty Thor. So we've got kind of a Captain Marvel thing going on. Now, Captain Marvel, we know him nowadays as Shazam. Captain Marvel isn't the Captain Marvel you'll see in the movies. No, Captain Marvel was the Big Red Cheese back in the day. He's the character that in DC we know as Shazam now. He used to be Captain Marvel. And he had the thing where where this little kid, Billy Batson, would say Shazam, and boom, he turns into Shazam. Turns into a different guy with superpowers. That's what Dr. Donald Blake is doing, basically. He's hitting his magic stick, which is really the hammer of Thor, and he turns into Thor. He transforms into another being, basically. And he has the power of Thor, which is kind of cool, but a little confusing. In these early issues of Thor, especially as the stories went on, you were kind of like, well, is Dr. Donald Blake Don Blake, or is he Thor? Are they two different people, or are they the same person? Does one take over for the other, but they're different, or are they the same? What's going on? It took a long time to work this out. It did eventually get worked out, though. But it's one of those instances where Stanley just is trooping along at such a quick pace. He didn't have time to think all this stuff out ahead of time, and he had to work it out on the run. And that's what he was doing with Thor. Now, as I said, the artwork on the first issue of Thor is great. The villains are just kind of run-of-the-mill aliens, but they're illustrated beautifully. Jack Kirby does a wonderful job on Thor. Jack Kirby does the first few issues of Thor, and he just cuts loose with his artwork. He's great. The stories are okay. The stories themselves are all right. They're not bad. You start to get more mythological elements as the stories progress, and that's a good thing. That is actually the strength of this comic book, is when you bring in the mythological elements. You've got Loki, who shows up pretty early in the series, Thor's half-brother Loki, which is great. Loki is a great villain, and he is a challenge to Thor. One of the problems with these initial issues of Thor, I think, are that Thor's villains, they didn't seem like they were tough enough to challenge Thor. They did challenge him somehow, but it's like they shouldn't have. Now, Thor is a god. He's basically the Superman of the Marvel Universe as far as his powers are concerned. But the villains, with the exception of Loki, didn't seem like they should have challenged him as much as they did. But, you know, the artwork was pretty solid, and I think the artwork was really what was selling this comic book. Excuse the garbage truck. It is garbage day here at Stately Vaughn Manor. It must have known that I'm trying to film a video, so it decided to make noise picking up the garbage. Oh well, what do you do? So, Thor is going along at a pretty good clip. Like I said, villains aren't great so far with the exception of Loki. He got a gangster in this issue. Why is Thor fighting a gangster? He shouldn't be fighting a gangster, he's Thor. But oh well. But the really tragic issues start showing up. This is when Thor gets kind of sucky for a while. Now, I think this next issue could be the very worst issue that Marvel Comics ever put out in the Golden Age. That is when Thor meets the Carbon Copy Man. Yes, the villain is called the Carbon Copy Man. I'm not making that up. It's literally Thor is trapped by the Carbon Copy Man. And this particular story has about the worst artwork I've ever seen in a Thor story. The artwork is by Al Hartley, and it is just atrocious. It is the worst. Again, aliens, and the artwork is indescribably bad for a Thor story. It's really amateurish. Now, Al Hartley, there must have been an emergency situation where it was like at last minute, Stan just needed somebody to do this story for some reason. So he had to get Al Hartley. Al Hartley was an artist who did teenage romances, basically. He was a romance artist. I think eventually he went to work on Archie comics, which was right up his street. It was his thing, teenage romance. That's Al Hartley. He was the last guy in the world you should have gotten to do Thor, and I really think, I mean, they must have pulled him in last minute because this artwork is just. It's just the worst. And I gotta figure, because this is bad even for him. And I gotta figure, I mean, just look at that awfulness. It's just so bad. It's just so bad. It is literally the worst Thor artwork that you will see in this or any other Epic collection, I'm sure. But I think it was an emergency. I think it was a last minute thing. They never should have pulled in poor Al Hartley on that. Now, the next artist, for some reason, Jack Kirby must have been off doing something else. Now, you're starting to get scripts that are being done by Larry Lieber, Stan Lee's brother, who is barely competent. He's not nearly as much fun as Stan Lee is. You can really tell. And the artwork for the next few issues is being done by Joe Sinote, who is not terrible. He's not terrible like in the Carbon Copy Man issue, but he is just completely wrong for Thor. Thor is just not a character this guy should be doing. Everything kind of looks like a bad Sword and Sandals film from the 60s, you know? Everything looks really low budget, which in a comic book, that shouldn't happen. Comic books have unlimited budgets, but you know, even the monsters look fake in this in this run. And again, it's not because this artist is bad, because this artist is not a bad artist. He's just wrong for the book. But thank goodness, oh thank goodness, Jack Kirby came back. If ever a comic book needed Jack Kirby, it was Thor. Now, Thor is still not the best Marvel comic book around because it's not the best written comic book, and then Jack Kirby goes away again, and we have to get more Joe Sinote artwork, and it's lame, and I'm just going to fast forward through that because it's all the same. And then we get Don Heck on here. Don Heck, who was great on Iron Man, I thought, but he's just, again, he's not great for Thor. I don't think he was great for the Avengers either. That's my personal opinion. And I like Don Heck. And he did some good things. He did some stuff good. Normal people, Don Heck was brilliant at. Superheroics, maybe not his thing. But actually, this was drawn by Jack Kirby, and that was just inked by Don Heck. That's good. But the interesting stuff starts happening when they start doing a backup story called Tales of Asgard. Tales of Asgard changed everything for Thor. He gave the Thor comic book kind of a direction. It took a while for them to realize that they had a hit with Tales from Asgard. Tales from Asgard, or Tales of Asgard, was just Asgardian myth stories, roughly based on these Asgardian myths. And Jack Kirby illustrated them, and he just cut loose and did just an amazing job doing these little backup stories. Here's straight up Don Heck right there, doing the main feature. So for the next few stories, we were getting villains like Mr. Hyde and the Cobra, which they're not bad villains. Cobra's kind of a creepy villain, actually, but they shouldn't be giving Thor any kind of challenge. I mean, Thor's Thor. But you get to the backup stuff, and you get to Tales of Asgard, and you're just getting an amazing a few pages of story. What are they, like 5 pages each? These Tales of Asgard. And then as the issues go along, I got to figure back in the day, people were just flipping to Tales of Asgard first, just to get these great fantasy myth backup stories. Because this is just the best stuff. And eventually, I'll skip ahead, you start getting to Thor himself in the Tales of Asgard. You start getting tales of Thor when he was younger, in his youth. As a god, Don Blake is nowhere around here. So we're starting to figure out at this point that Thor is the real character, and Don Blake is not. Who Don Blake is and what Don Blake is still a mystery for a little while longer. Eventually, you'll find out. But the backup stories, they're starting to flesh in the backstory of all these characters, and eventually, that kind of thing makes its way in to the main storyline. So you're starting to see more of Asgard. You saw it before, but you're seeing more of it now. And characters like the Enchantress is showing up. You're going to Loki becomes a more interesting character. He's still just the most villainous of villains, but he does become more interesting, and the Enchantress is more interesting than him. She's a great character. And you get the Executioner shows up, and the Executioner is just a fantastic character. Here's Thor battling the Executioner there. You start getting a lot more from Asgard, and that is fantastic, because by the time you get to this back section of this book, Thor is really cooking. Thor is getting really good. You're still getting the Cobra and Mr. Hyde over and over and over again. I don't know why those guys kept showing up, but eventually more of Asgard is showing up in the main storylines too. But most of that you're going to be getting in the next epic collection and the epic collections after that. The main feature for most of this book is still, every once in a while when you're lucky you get Asgardians, but you get also characters like the Grey Gargoyle, who is lame. The Grey Gargoyle. He turns people to stone. Yay. So you still get that. You do get appearances by the Avengers in this. You got teensy little bit of Doctor Strange in this. But by the time this comic really starts getting really, really good, this epic collection is over. So the first epic collection, kind of a mixed bag. But it's important because not only does it introduce Thor, but it introduces the Tales of Asgard. And the Tales of Asgard, besides being a brilliant backup feature, starts to influence the stuff that's happening in the main feature. And when all of that stuff starts mixing together, you're getting a really, really good comic book. You're getting both a fantasy comic book and a superhero comic book. And it starts edging more towards the fantasy. And that's a good thing. So Thor, he's awesome. Rough start, but he gets a lot better after this. But this is pretty important, this particular epic collection. Not his best stuff, and it had one of the stories, like I said, which is one of the worst stories you'll ever see in any Golden Age comic book. But after that initial rough patch, Thor starts getting great. So that's my epic collection for this week. Next week, I can already tell you it's going to be the X-Men. I'm going to catch up or catch you up on my Read Every X-Men challenge, which I'm doing. So we're going to be talking about the second volume of the X-Men and the X-Men epic collections. So I will catch you next time. Thanks, guys.